Hedge fund registration. Everybody asks me about it. I want to start a hedge fund. Do I have to register? Do I have to register? And it's an amorphous question, right? And it's not knocking anybody for asking the question. It's the right thing to do. Always ask questions, especially when you're entering into something this complex. But it's a bit amorphous because it involves a few different elements of securities law, okay? And so keeping it in the context of securities, so in the crypto space, think of your ICO token, or just generally speaking, your standard financial product security hedge fund. The question is, what do I have to register for, and do I have to in fact register? And so you have to worry about two things when you're talking about hedge fund and starting up a hedge fund. One is the Investment Company Act, okay, and registration thereunder, and then registering, number two, as a registered investment advisor, right? And both of those are separate and kind of independent elements of the process, right? And as a general rule, number one, under the Investment Company Act, all hedge funds have to register with the SEC. Now, there's two important exemptions to that which you're going to rely on if you're going to start a hedge fund. The biggest one is Section 3C1 of the Investment Company Act, which basically says hedge funds with up to 100 accredited only, okay, so accredited only investors are exempt from registration. So again, we go back to the definition of accredited investor. You're talking about $1 million net worth exclusive of your personal residence, or $200,000 for an individual over the last 2 years in net income, $300,000 for a couple, or an entity, trust, or defined benefit plan with $5 million in net assets. So 3C1, 100 or less accredited investors. Another exemption, 3C7, which allows for up to 2,000 investors, but has a higher standard, right? It has a higher standard of investor, must be qualified, sophisticated investors, which have a $5 million net worth requirement. So generally speaking, the 3C7 exemption is used for larger institutional backed hedge funds. Your startup hedge fund is almost always going to go under the 3C1 exemption, which limits you to 100 accredited only investors. So that's part one. Part two is registered investment advisor registration, right? And this involves, again, only securities. We're not talking about commodities. We'll talk about commodities at a later date. But for registered investment advisor registration, the SEC has a scheme and the states have a scheme, right? And so the SEC says, to the extent that you are managing under 150 million in net assets in the fund, you do not have to register as a registered investment advisor. So 150 and less, you're exempt from SEC registration. But the state, as a general rule, the state that you are domiciled in and operate from, okay, generally speaking, will require you to register as a registered investment advisor in that state, right? Because again, you have state blue sky and you've got like your federal SEC schemes. Now, several states, notably California, New York, Pennsylvania, have exemptions that say private funds, right? Private funds that are private and not held as like a publicly traded partnership or anything like that, are exempt from registration. So, being located in one of those locales exempts you from registering with those states as a registered investment advisor. Of course, the general rule is if you are exempt from registered investment advisor registration, you cannot earn a performance fee, unless you are earning it from accredited investors only. So it kind of jives with the 3C1 exemption from the Investment Company Act, where you're only taking in accredited investors. So, for this to really work from a startup hedge fund perspective, you're looking at accredited investors, and you're looking at some of the exemptions from registered investment advisors. And again, this is only for securities. Commodities is a different bird because of the type of product. So when you're talking about like Bitcoin futures, things of that nature, the rules change a little bit, and that sort of begets its own missive from me in a later date, which I'll get to here shortly. But generally speaking, to kind of wrap up, hedge fund startup, Investment Company Act, registered investment advisor registration. Those are what you have to be concerned with, and there's exemptions that you can take advantage of. They do limit you in the sense of who you're going to approach and who you're going to market to, but in reality, it's probably the best and only way that you're going to get off the ground, especially if you don't have prior industry experience, certain licenses, things of that nature, and don't want to take some FINRA exams. So in any event, hit me up if you have questions. It's a very complicated area, and I get the question a lot, so I figured why not? Let's talk about it. at@tracyfirm.com, bitcoin-lawyer.org. I'll talk to you later. Cheers.